Sugar plays an incredibly important role in any cake recipe. Sometimes it's there to give the cake structure and support, sometimes it's there for volume and moisture, and in many cases it's also there simply to add flavour and sweetness. But because of all these factors, I've always found it really intimidating to reduce the amount of sugar in any recipe. I really want to eat less sugar, but I also don't want the cake to become dry and tasteless, or really flat when it's supposed to be springy and spongy. The truth is, reducing the amount of sugar a little bit usually works, but that's hardly scientific. So in this video, I want to tackle this in a little bit more systematically. I'll be baking and eating a lot of cakes, all with varying level of sugars to see how far we can push a recipe. And I think I found a few rules which should work for everyone, so let's get started. Before we begin, some basics. To state the obvious, not all cakes are made in the same way. In my research, I found absolutely no consistency in terminology. Some cookbooks think there are 4 ways, but I've also seen 5 or 6 in other books, and I've even read blogs suggesting there are 12 different ways to mix a batter. Way too complicated. To keep it simple, I will say that most cakes fall into one of 3 categories. First is the all-in-one method, where the ingredients are just mixed together into a batter before it's baked. The order doesn't really matter as long as it's all blended into one. Think of your pound cake or lemon drizzle cake or even your supermarket pre-mix boxes. Next is the creaming or sponge method, where the fats and sugar are beaten together first. This ensures the batter captures air to build volume and texture. This type of cake has good structure and is great for decorating and icing. Usually the fats will be something like butter, but other fats like egg yolks or oil can also be used to make lighter sponges. Examples of this include your Madeira cakes or your Victoria sponge cakes. And finally, there is the foaming method, where the egg whites and sugars are beaten first. This is super light and the cake is very soft and airy. The rest of the ingredients are folded in gently later to add the flavour without losing too much volume. Chiffon cakes and angel cakes are excellent examples of this. The vast majority of cake recipes you find online will fall into one of these 3 categories. Instead of using my own recipes, I have taken 3 popular ones using the 3 different methods from BBC Good Foods, a great website for recipes by the way. For each recipe, I'll bake 3 versions of it. The baseline, which is the recipe as it is, one at 90% of the sugar, and one at 50% of the sugar. Ideally, I would like to do more versions, but there's only so much cake I can eat, so 3 will have to do for now. Many hours of baking later and the results are in, and here are the main takeaways. Reducing sugar levels down to 90% shouldn't be a problem for most cake recipes. We can see that compared to the original recipe, the texture and volume of the cake stayed pretty consistent across all 3 methods. In fact, I could taste the butter and eggs a little bit more because there's less sugar. Okay, but what if 10% isn't good enough? We want to reduce more. Well, that depends on the recipe. With the all-in-one method, even reducing it by 50% seemed not to have affected the rise and the texture too much. Sure, the 50% version is a little bit drier, but not too noticeable. So feel free to experiment. I have a feeling that dropping it further won't affect the cake that much except for how sweet it is. The other 2 methods are more sensitive. At 50%, we can see that the creamed cake is a little bit flatter and less airy than the original, but at 90% it is absolutely okay. So I would say a 75% version would be perfectly fine for the cream cake. The foam cake, however, looked drastically different. In fact, I felt this making the batter. The egg whites didn't whip up nearly as much with only 50% of the sugar. So the rule here is not to go anything below 90%. You can see it in the texture as well. The 50% version is a lot drier than the 100% version. Putting it all together then, feel free to drop 10% of the sugar from your cake recipes. This should have minimal effect on the volume and texture of the cake. If the recipe is using the all-in-one method, you can cut a lot of sugar because it's only there for taste and not structure. Up to 50% reduction was still good in my testing. If the recipe is using the creaming method, where the fats are beaten first with the sugar, then you can try to go down to 75%, but not any lower. Any lower, the texture of the cake will become noticeably different. Foam cakes are the most sensitive as it relies on the sugar to build structure, so these recipes should really be left as it is, or at most reduced down to 90%. Any lower, you'll start to lose volume and moisture in the cake, which is not ideal. Okay, that was a lot of baking, so let me know if any of these rules work for you, or if you have different results in your recipe. Let me know down in the comments. And now if you excuse me, I have a lot of cakes to eat, so I'll see you in the next one.